myself, about myself, you know. But I'm talking about the situation in general. Because when you see somebody in a wheelchair, you probably think the same thing I think. You probably think, geez, that's got to be tough not be able to walk. Some of you might not care. But if you are thinking that, I want you to know you're right. You're right along the right lines, because it is. It is tough not being able to walk. It's also tough not being able to feel anything from the chest down. It's also tough not being able to move any of your 10 fingers. Sad fact is, it gets even uglier than that. Because it's also tough when you lose control of all body function, valve, bladder control. It's gone. You got to learn how to take care of that and deal with it by artificial means. So it really is. It's a ugly situation I'm talking about here today. Now, when I think about my accident, I have to think about ways it could have been prevented. You know, from the first day I was in the intensive care, I was saying to myself, you know, geez, what happened? What went wrong? What did I do? I've thought about it, and I've come up with 3 basic ways I think it probably could have been prevented. Number 1, it doesn't take a genius to figure it out. I never should have been driving that night. I never should have been on the highway. I was warned over and over again. I still went out. I took the car. I had to crash. It was 100% my fault. Number 2, anybody who had to be out that night, law enforcement people, doctors, nurses, people had to be out. The maximum safe speed limit due to the weather conditions was probably about 20 miles per hour. The estimated speed at the time of my crash was in between 60 and 65 miles per hour. So I was driving dangerously fast for the weather conditions. But number 3 and foremost, and please hear this, if you don't hear anything else that I've got to say here today, I'll beg you to hear this and carry it home and share it with your family and friends and anybody else who will listen. Because if I would have just had sense enough, if I'd have just known what I know today, famous last words, of course, but if I would have just had sense enough to buckle my safety belt before I headed for that party, I don't think that I would be sitting here paralyzed today. Because you see, when the front wheels of that car hit that sheet of ice and it spun out of control, there was nothing I could do. I wasn't even sitting behind the steering wheel anymore. My body was slamming from the left to the right and back and forth. I wasn't even in front of the wheel. There was no way I could control the automobile. Had I been wearing a lap belt, just that simple lap belt that goes around the hips, I truly believe it would have held me right there in front of the wheel. And I think I would have had more control of the automobile. That's not to say, you know, the car might still soar through the air and came to a crash and stop. You see, that's when I broke my neck. When the car came to a crash and stop, my upper body kept traveling at 65 miles per hour and slammed into the steering column, the dash, and the windshield. That bony structure in my neck was broken in 2, and it sliced through that spinal cord like a hot butter knife. And that's just like cutting a telephone line in 2. My brain can no longer tell my legs to move. My brain can't tell my fingers to move. My brain can't tell my bladder it's full. Had I been wearing a shoulder harness, just that simple shoulder harness that comes across the chest and connects the lap belt, well, I truly believe it would have prevented me from being thrown into the steering column, the dash, and the windshield, and therefore I don't think I would have suffered the broken neck. And then I do these types of presentations, and I've had the pleasure of doing this quite a bit over the years. I've heard a lot of excuses for not wearing safety belts. A whole lot of them. I don't mind telling you, I think I've heard them all. And to be quite honest with you, not too many of them make a whole lot of sense. Just a couple I want to share with you real quick, like, to try and destroy some myths. First of all, when I first started studying automobile safety in general and the dynamics of a crash, I had to ask myself a question. I had to say to myself, you know, why? Why did it take this to make me see that that device probably could have helped me in that situation? You know, why? I've thought about it, and I think I probably had the same excuse for not wearing a safety belt that a lot of people seem to have today. And that was, hey, you know, I'm a good driver, I'm in control. What are the chances of that happening? Well, now that I've had the crash, I kind of see it through a different pair of glasses. And I know that I could be involved in another one, and I know that any one of you in here could be in one. The fact is, 1 out of every 5 drivers will be in an automobile crash this year. People, someone is killed approximately every 10 minutes in this country in an automobile crash. Someone is seriously injured or disabled approximately every 10 seconds. Your chances of being in a crash, whether you're riding in or driving an automobile, are pretty great. The excuse that I hear more often than any of the others for not wearing a safety belt, and the one I don't mind telling you I hate the worst, is the one where people say to me, you know, Tony, I don't wear that crazy thing because it's just downright uncomfortable. Boy, I hate that one, but I hear it all the time. And I got to say to those folks, first of all, you're probably right, because it is a little bit uncomfortable until you get used to it. Until you get used to it, it kind of rubs around the hips a little bit, or it rubs your shoulder a little bit, until you get used to it. But if you think that's uncomfortable, you ought to try, try being slammed into a steering column at about 65 miles per hour. Or better yet, try sitting in one of these for the rest of your life. I'm not going to sit up here and try to kid you guys. This wheelchair is uncomfortable. I could go on and on and on with the different excuses I've heard for not wearing a safety belt, but I don't think that would be to any great purpose here today. I'd rather go ahead and get into the final part of my presentation, that being the question and answer part of it all. But before I do that, I want to just briefly touch on another national tragedy that we're faced with here in our lives when it comes to highway safety. And I say national because it's out there in California, it's down in Texas and up in Michigan. God knows it's here in Virginia where we live, and it's in every other state in this country. And that's the drunk driving problem. And I'm not going to sit up here and preach at you guys about drunk driving, but I am going to say this. It's getting to the point now where I go to speak to different groups and organizations, and folks will say to me, you know, Tony, what's the big deal about this drunk driving thing? Every time I pick up a newspaper, I read something about it. Every time I pick up a magazine. Well, let me briefly tell you what the big deal is. Last year, almost close to 40,000 people were killed on our nation highway. Close to 40,000 people. I don't know if you can fathom how many that is. That would be like a Boeing 727 jetliner, a major aircraft going down every day for an entire year, and everyone aboard being killed. 40,000 people. Now the sad fact is, about half of those deaths were alcohol related. And that's what the big deal is. You know, I'm often asked if I were drinking when I had my crash, and I'm not going to sit up here and lie to you folks or kid you. That was very common for me at that point in my life. Every weekend there was a party. I was the first one there, the last one to leave. However, at that point, I hadn't been drinking. And there's a reason for that. 1 week away from that night was my regional wrestling tournament. I was undefeated. I had the #1 seed. I was supposed to win it all. No junior in my school had ever done that. That meant a lot to me. For that reason, I guess I was kind of laying low, if you will. However, there again, I'm not going to sit there and kid you. Had I made it to the party, I'm sure I probably would have had 2, 3, 4 beers. I'd have been saying to myself, hey, a few beers, I drive better after a few. You've heard these guys before. That's because at that point in my life, I wasn't smart enough to know that 1 beer equals 1 mixed drink equals 1 glass of wine. Alcohol is alcohol is alcohol, and it all affects your brain and your ability to drive. You're all getting to a point in your lives, or certainly are to a point in your lives where you're faced with a lot of choices and you got to make a lot of decisions. And when it comes to alcohol, you got to ask yourselves a couple of questions here. You got to say to yourself, first of all, do I want to drink? Do I want to drink alcohol? That's a choice you have to make. I can't do that for you. Your teachers can't be there for you. Your parents can't be there with you all the time to make these choices. If you should choose to drink, all I'll say is that you should be aware of the underage drinking laws that we have, because they're pretty harsh and they can really change your life in a negative way. And if that's not bad enough, if you're involved in some sort of tragedy that's alcohol related, it can literally ruin your life. We've got a situation, I know you're familiar with it, just 1 county over, where a young lady last New Year's, 16 years old at another high school, was driving drunk, ran a red light, ended up hitting another car and killed a man. And her life's been turned upside down. She's in jail right now. She won't finish her high school years like a normal high school kid due to one poor choice and drunk driving. So you should be aware of the consequences if you should choose to drink. But if you do choose to drink, that's a choice that you've made. And if you make that choice, you're going to have to ask yourself another question, question number 2, and that is, do I want to drink and drive? And that one, gang, I have a horrible problem with. Because you see, when you take alcohol and automobiles and you put the two together, you come up with a dangerous weapon. And it's one that kills. I beg each and every one of you in here, please, just please give it a whole lot of thought before you ever get behind the wheel intoxicated, or even worse, get into a vehicle with someone who is drunk. The results could truly be deadly. Okay, without any more, what I'd like to do is to answer a few questions for you guys. Show of hands, who's going to get us started off here this morning? Yes, right in the middle. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Real lucky in the respect that the boy that was riding with me actually ended up walking away from the crash. And I don't mean he got up and walked home. He was taken to the hospital where he spent the next several days with some busted up ribs and a broken up shoulder, and he was cut up really bad. You see, he went through the windshield and back. I think I can speak for him and say he probably would have fared a lot better had he been wearing his safety belt, but he didn't suffer any permanent disability. And for that, I'm very thankful. Along the lines of that question, I'm often asked, about my friends. And one thing I found through this particular tragedy, and I think it's indicative of life, we find out through tragedy, who our friends are. And the truth is, the guy that was riding with me didn't turn out to be such a great friend after all. I mean, he came to see me in a hospital a couple of times, but that was about the size of it, the people who did stick by me mainly were the guys I was involved in athletics with. You know, the guys I played football with, the guys I wrestled with. You know, they were the ones that really stood by me in their